And thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm David Asman in for Neil Cavuto. Let's get right to our top story. A hotter than expected inflation report and rate cut expectations are now in limbo. Forbes Media CEO Steve Forbes is here, as well as Public Ventures President and Chief Market Strategist Lou Basenese is here as well. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Lou, let's talk about the markets first off. Dow is down 400 points right now. Clearly, the inflation numbers have investors really scared about the possibility of not so many rate cuts, if any at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's deja vu all over again. Last year, you remember, investors were adamant that we're going to start seeing cuts in June and July, and the Fed said, no, we're going to watch inflation. And I think this is the fear that keeps the Fed up at night, that inflation is stickier than expected, that it possibly reaccelerates, which really is a nightmare for them scenario that could be a return to the late 1970s, where you saw inflation look like it was under control and then take off. So I think that's what they're trying to avoid, and investors are just having to readjust to the reality that there's no cut coming in March.
Lou, what makes me nervous, I can actually remember the late 1970s. I don't know if you can, but boy, Steve and I can tell you about it. And Steve, you know what worries not investors so much, but the average Joe in America are these inflation numbers, because one listed among the data that we got in these inflation numbers was the average hourly earnings are now down 2.1% from where they were in January 21 when President Biden took over. The average American is getting hit hardest by this hot inflation number.
Yeah, in the January jobs report, you found that people were working less than before, and that's a danger sign. You know, companies had a hard time hiring people, labor shortages. Some areas still have labor shortages, like nursing and some restaurants. But other parts of the economy, since it was so hard to hire people, they're reluctant to lay them off. Instead, they're reducing the number of hours worked before they make a decision of letting go somebody that had such a hard time hiring in the first place.
Steve, staying with you for a second, we also have the Treasury coming out and admitting that for the first 4 months of fiscal year 2024, which begins in October, we had a $532 billion deficit. That's getting close to $2 trillion a year as in our $6 trillion budget. That is huge. That has a tremendous effect on inflation, does it not?
Well, what it means is, one, resources are going to the government instead of the private sector putting these resources to productive use. It also means at some point, who's going to finance this? You know, the thing to look out for is how well the bond sales are going to be doing. You saw the CBO gave their 10-year projection a few days ago. Deficits are going to go now about $1.5 trillion a year to $2.6 trillion in the early 2030s if nothing is done. Certainly things will be done, but right now it's pretty grim. Because who's going to pay for those deficits? Well, we the people, either through inflation or taxes. Yuck.
And Lou, the bottom line is that for the Fed to be able, for the Treasury to be able to sell these new debt bonds that they're going to have to issue, since the Fed is not going to be picking them up as they used to in previous years, that means they're going to have to raise interest rates to get investors to buy them. That means we're facing high interest rates for a long time, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what the Fed told us to expect. I would argue this is a better scenario than if the rates were lower and we were having to finance all these deficits, because investors are willing to accept higher interest rates, right? I mean, you saw leading into today, we saw the speculation coming back into the market wildly. I mean, Bitcoin hitting near recent highs, Russell 2000, biotech, and they all just got knocked, their knees taken out from them today. I mean, the Russell 2000 last I looked was down about 3-4% today alone. So look, you need the bond buying. It's not an ideal situation, but investors should have known this was coming. It's been in the data. They just got ahead of themselves expecting a rate cut in March, betting that there was an 80% chance. Now that's down to an 8% chance if you look at the futures bets.
Well, Steve, I like that Lou has a slightly more optimistic tone than I think you and I do, but it is true that the American economy is proved to be extraordinarily resilient for all the stuff that is thrown at it by politicians who really don't care that much about it. We have pretty strong GDP numbers over the past couple of quarters. I'm just wondering if that strength can continue with the high interest rates.
Well, the key thing is to look at what they call C&I loans, commercial industrial loans by banks, which go to smaller, mid-sized companies. That is not where it should be. David Malpass, the former head of the World Bank, estimates last year went down not only 35 billion, but in a normal economy would have gone up 175 billion. So smaller businesses are not getting the capital they need for inventories and new equipment and the like. The regulators are talking about putting on new capital requirements, with Jamie Dimon, head of Morgan, warning the consequences of that. You're absolutely irrelevant. You don't need it. It means less lending. So you put those storm clouds out there. So even though the economy is extraordinarily resilient, that's the optimistic thing. It just goes to show, hopefully after the elections next year, we get a government that is pro-growth. Tax cuts like we had with Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump's first tax cut. Yeah. So you get that, and this economy will come roaring back. Not a moment too soon.
All right. I think you got two amens on that from both Lou and me. Lou, what about real estate? It also has proved pretty resilient for all of the high prices and everything. The prices continue to increase, by the way. They're up 4.4% over last year right now. But can they continue to go up with all the pressure from high rates? Because high rates are forcing a lot of potential buyers to sit on their hands.
They are, but I mean, here's the thing. Mitch Rochelle, who's a guru here in the real estate market too, and I know is on the show. He's been very early and right about this. It's not a demand issue in the real estate market; it's a supply issue. So even with interest rates higher, you're seeing just a 1% decline in mortgage rates has really led to more buying activity, and that's really what's happening is we don't have affordable housing, we don't have enough housing. So you saw the CPI print. I think shelter was up 0.6%. That was a huge contributor to the increase, and that's the underlying fundamentals in real estate is we have too many people in need of shelter, not enough supply, and therefore the prices are going to keep going up or at least stay high.
Steve, finally, Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California, pretty far to the left of the political spectrum, she is now pushing for a $50 an hour minimum wage. Now, I'm old enough to remember a $2.50 hour per hour minimum wage. What would a $50 minimum wage do to business in this country?
And David, I'm old enough to remember $1.25.
Whoa!
The woolly mammoth. But the fact of the matter is, why not $500 an hour? All it does is drive up costs. You're seeing that in California, the devastation it's wreaking and will wreak on the restaurant industry, raising prices, shutting down. And who does that hurt the most? Having that less affordable food. It hurts people with lower and middle incomes. Right. So the people who need the help the most are getting whacked the hardest.
It's funny you say that. My first job at $2.50 an hour was washing dishes in a restaurant. A lot of people started in a restaurant. I did well by restaurants over the years. Lou, Steve, great to see you both. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.